So allow that customer to kind of come in and see what our product would look like in their space. So that's an aspect of it with the visualizer where I want to make sure that we are looking to that future customer. And as that technology progresses, make sure that we're staying on top of that. There's going to be something, you see what's happening now with some of the things where you can scan a room and you get measurements. Those are the things that we want to make sure that we're adding, those type of benefits and those type of tools for our customer to, again, help them visualize what our product's going to look like in their space.
Welcome to the E-commerce Toolbox Expert Perspectives, a podcast by Noivo, where we explore the elite strategies and cutting-edge insights with our expert guests. Get ready to propel your e-commerce business to the next level.
Welcome to another episode of the E-commerce Toolbox Experts Perspective. Joining us today, all the way over from Atlanta, we have Jeff Hanson. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Jeff is the SVP of e-commerce at Floor and Decor, which is an Omni Channel retailer. I'm assuming a lot of you folks listening have heard or seen a store before. So Jeff, why don't you start off by giving us a bit of your journey and how you landed in Floor and Decor and how you're an SVP of e-com?
It's a long history in retail. I've been here at Floor and Decor now for 11 years. This is the longest I've ever been with one company. And I always kind of attest that to, I've always been excited and I love to build. And then once we kind of get beyond the build and move into that maintenance mode, that's when I start to get a little antsy and look for my next opportunity to build. But how I got here, as I mentioned, kind of a long history in retail. So it's where I kind of find my passion. It goes back as far as like even a part-time job in high school. But my background and from a training perspective is actually in graphic design, believe it or not. So, working commercially, I did a lot of packaging design, advertisements, brochures, things like that. So a little bit more of a 2D traditional media, but that led me into being asked to work on websites. So as it moved from kind of a more of a technical thing to more of a customer facing aspect, that's where I kind of got a lot of focus on building websites. So much so that at one point in time, I had an agency that focused very much on graphic design, advertising, marketing. But the number one thing I was being asked to do was create websites. So kind of from there, that's where I started being asked to do e-commerce websites. And it's interesting to kind of look at that graphic design background. And people are like, that seems kind of odd. But if you think about it, it's just visual communication. And then we start to think about e-commerce and usability. It's very similar to my training in graphic design and trying to get that communication across as quickly and easily to the customer as far as what those actions should be. Beyond kind of going from the agency world during the .com boom, if you will, that's when I took my first all e-commerce focused position. And I went to Michael's Stores, where that was my first job where I'm 100% focused on digital. I led their digital creative team initially, and then ultimately gained responsibility for their entire e-commerce strategy and the different development teams, quality assurance teams, design teams, marketing teams, etc.
Cool. Talk to us a bit about what are the responsibilities of someone in your role now? Obviously, Floor and Decor is a very large business overall, has its Omni Channel, so it means there's a bunch of stores. You have an online presence, you have B2B, you have B2C. Talk to us a bit about what are your actual responsibilities when it comes to being the SVP of e-com?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, I'm responsible for e-commerce, but the other part of this is also responsible for a lot of other things, including our customer care department. So we have remote agents across the country. From my perspective, the greatest customer input we have are those people that are calling directly and telling us what their experience was like or where they need help. And that helps us kind of adjust our business. But in addition to that, I end up having to work very closely and with a lot of different partners. For instance, I mean, you understand that Omni Channel, it's not like you can have an Omni Channel department. So we end up really having to make sure that I'm aligned with our CIO. So John Adamson's our CIO, and I work very, very closely with him. And so we have to make sure that we're aligned on that overarching customer experience from a technical standpoint. I work very closely with our CMO, making sure that everything that we're doing is, from a brand perspective, really aligned. I have to work with a merchandising team to make sure that we're following trends and we're representing those the right way. So in a way, one of my primary responsibilities is to not be afraid to put on another hat. I like to say, and I tell people, it's like, we're never allowed to say, not my job. It's very important for us to be willing to kind of put on another hat and say, hey, let me look into that. I'm not familiar with it, but you know what? I'm going to do my best to become an expert in short order and we'll figure out a way to do it. And then, like I mentioned, it's gaining the alignment across the teams in the corporation, making sure the leaders understand where we're going and why it's important to not just roll something out for e-com, that it's really important for us to roll it out for the entire brand, and just making sure that all of those experiences are aligned. So you just think about a customer, an omni-channel customer, and all those different touch points. So if they ask a question in our store, I want the answer to be the same as if a customer called the call center, and the same as if they asked a question online, or regardless, I want the answer to that question to be the same. And so it's very important for us to make sure that all of those are aligned, and we recognize that the customer shops across all those channels and uses all those channels. And a big proponent of consistency when we start to talk about omni-channel and what I refer to as unified commerce.
How has your experience across other retailers shaped your approach to leading that? Like, without naming specifics, have you seen where that's not the case, where there's the in-store experience and then there's the online experience and they're quite disjointed? So yeah, curious about that.
It's a great question, and definitely is the case. And you run into it even now. And it sounds so crazy, but you got to remember that we're in a industry that's constantly evolving. The customer expectations are constantly evolving, and we have to evolve with them. So if I say that it wasn't an omni-channel experience in my past, like for instance, at Michael's, that was a long time ago, we were focused on line extensions. So if a customer at the time, and that's not the case anymore, if the customer went in a store, they'd see 10 particular paintbrushes, and then we might carry an additional 20 online. That's not an omni-channel experience. The customer expects to find the exact same things in the store as they find online, but maybe with some additional ones if it's specialized and things like that. So just kind of watching what that customer expectation is and making sure that you're staying aligned with that. Even in our own case, I mean, like I said, I've been here for 11 years and we've seen a lot of things progress. At a time when I started, the stores were not a huge fan of my department because they felt like the customers that are buying online are taking the inventory from their stores. They weren't recognizing the fact that this was their store customer who would choose to shop the website and pick up in their store. So it was definitely kind of an education piece to make sure that the stores would recognize that this customer is their store customer and just choosing to shop through a different channel. An important aspect to that are the things that you have to do in order to address that. I make sure that a store gets credit for the sale. My big joke is that most companies or most departments have a P&L. I just have an L because I make sure that all the sales that I get go to the store because I want them to be a huge fan of my department and what we're doing.
How have you seen that evolve over decades you've been with Floor and Decor? Was there like a inflection point at any specific time? I mean, COVID kind of comes to mind. How have you seen that evolve over your tenure?
I could write a book because it's not just with Floor and Decor. I've seen it with a lot of other retailers as well. It's fascinating. I'm a little bit of a history nerd. So in particular, when it comes to retail, I like to watch and just kind of see what progresses and what trends change and how retailers are evolving to what those customers' needs are. So just kind of watching how that's changed. And it's things like buy online, pick up in store. And that's used to be kind of a foreign idea. And now it's become the norm. It's table stakes. That's what people expect. You think about things like you mentioned, the pandemic. Think about Uber Eats and things like that. That was a foreign idea to all of us not that long ago, probably in having groceries delivered. The first companies that tried to do that failed miserably, but now it's the norm. So just kind of watching what those trends are, you definitely see it evolve. You see those front runners and then you see those fast followers, and you just kind of see what trends are customers grabbing onto and how are people addressing them. Ultimately, if you don't evolve and change those customers' needs and think about what your customer looks like tomorrow as opposed to what your customer looks like right now, that's the kind of stuff that causes problems. You have to make sure that you're always looking to that future customer and making sure that you have a plan to address them over time.
What are some of the tactical things that you've implemented as you kind of have gone through these journeys and learned things about the customer's expectations and work closely with the stores? Like, what are some of the tactical things that you've implemented in your kind of department to drive a better omni-channel experience?
So the first thing I'll point to is what we're doing, as I mentioned, with buy online, pick up in store. Our product is a little bit unique and a little bit more challenging if you think about it. To move it, you need a forklift. So there's always going to be a focus on that buy online, pick up in store aspect of it. But then from there, recognizing the fact that we have two very different customer segments. We have the homeowner like you and I, who are looking for inspiration. But then we also have that pro who's in our store every day. They know what they need. They're looking to place their order online and ultimately pick it up in store the next day for efficiency. Time is money for them. So we need to make sure that we're addressing all of those customer segments. So one of the things that I think is a very good omni-channel example is what we call MOPO. It's My Order, Pay Online. So we give customers the ability to go into our store, work with one of our associates, build a quote, and then ultimately when they've had that quote built, they don't have to purchase right then. We'll send an email to either their pro or their spouse or their home. So they have time to kind of digest, make sure this is all right, and then ultimately make that purchase. So giving that customer the ability to work with an associate, but then transact online, hugely important. And then vice versa, you want to make sure that we're addressing that customer who's coming into our store, might be overwhelmed. If you've been into one of our stores, we have vignettes, which are one of our great inspirational tools. It's like a tiny bathroom or a tiny kitchen. We want to make it easy for a customer to scan a QR code and see everything that's in that vignette. Because a lot of the time you have a customer come in and if they're online, they'll say, I want everything in that picture. If they're in our store, they say, this vignette is totally my style. I love everything in it. I want to purchase everything here. We want to make it easy for them to get those items and continue with their journey and ultimately make that purchase.
How does Floor and Decor approach leveraging data to drive a seamless experience? How much of coordination needs to happen between maybe the CIO and yourself and both departments around effectively leveraging data so that they're not siloed, so that we're not marketing to the same customer in two different ways?
That's an interesting question too. And that's another one of those things that gets back to that progression. I don't want to make it sound like we're perfect, but there's definitely been an evolution to where we've had to recognize that, to where we need to find out that pro customer, we have their information in our database. We know their purchase history. We have to make sure we understand this is what they purchase online and this is what they purchase in the store. So we definitely want to make sure that we're marrying that information. I focus a lot on the pro customer because that is a very important aspect of our business. Yes, we want to make sure that the homeowner is inspired. They're equally as important. I don't want to sound like I'm going either way, but that pro, think about from their perspective, when they come to our website, they don't need to see a how-to video on how to install tile. I mean, they've been doing it forever. So we want to show them have a different experience. So if they're coming from a pro email, we'll give them a pro banner and a little bit more of a pro experience that's more specific to them. And then further on, if based on behavior, we'll make product recommendations. And what I mean by that is, so if a customer in first few clicks, we can tell if they're high in the funnel or lower in the funnel. If they're higher in the funnel, we'll give them an idea of things you might like, or if you like this product, you may enjoy this product. But if a few clicks in, we recognize that they're going to purchase, because this is another aspect of our product that's always very unique, is that when you buy a pair of shoes, you get them, you put them on. With our product, you buy a tile, then you have to have it installed. So in this situation, when they're further down the funnel, we say, you're going to purchase this tile, you're interested in this tile. These are the products you're going to need to install it. So we're making recommendations based on that behavior. And then ultimately what you want to be able to do is look at that behavior, understand it. And then once they place that, because up to this point, that behavior is really anonymous. You want to make sure that you can take that behavior and link it back to the customer or the type of customer that you've identified once they make that purchase.
I love what you're saying because I think it's definitely overlooked. I think if you put yourself in a silo, and I know Starbucks, not to take us on a tangent, I recently listened to a podcast, and not to date this podcast, but Starbucks is struggling in the markets. There's some leadership changes. And one of the reasons that I listened to a podcast of their old CEO, Howard Schultz, and he was talking about how there was a disconnect between the in-store and the app. So the app team was running wild and pushing everyone towards mobile orders. And it was really actually commoditizing and degrading the core service, which was you go in, you pay $7 for a cup of coffee because they ask you for your name. You get to add a half pump of this and a sprinkle of that. And it was really interesting to hear how the lack of coordination and alignment between two teams, one was just maximizing conversion and KPI, and it was actually hurting the core business and coming back as a negative overall. So hearing you talk about how you coordinate multiple departments, I think is really, really critical in making sure that, okay, maybe e-com's growing, but the overall business is shrinking because we're actually hurting the overall business in some unintended way. So it's really cool and interesting to hear you to say that effectively.
It's important because a lot of the times ego gets involved or there's something like that to where you have to understand our culture and there is no ego. And from my perspective, I don't care where the sale comes from as long as we get the sale. I don't care where the customer transacts with us as long as they have a good transaction or a good interaction. And for that, that's where we get into that consistency. We need to make sure that this great information that we have online, for instance, with the most frequently asked questions that a customer asks, we need to make sure that that gets down to our training department and ultimately to our stores. It's just hugely important to make sure that we're linking all of those channels with that consistent information to ultimately, at the end of the day, keeping the customer in the center and making sure that they are the ones having that great experience.
How do you do this for integrated customer support? How do you make that cohesive experience, whether someone's asking a store associate or asking effectively the website or a customer care agent?
Yeah, so we have a knowledge base and we've created it on the customer care side. Because you think about it, we have a ton of interactions. That's really probably the number one spot where if you look at kind of a bulk where we're getting a ton of feedback from the customer about what we need to do and what we need to address and things like that from what the customer is directly telling us. The other thing we have is we allow the customers to give us feedback or ask questions through our website. So let me go down that tangent for just a little bit. So question and answer, it's a common feature that everybody has. And we put it on our website. I was really anticipating that the questions we would get like, hey, what looks good with this tile? What would coordinate with it? But the questions that we get are so complex and advanced. It's amazing. So it's like somebody would ask, I'm on the 10th floor of this condominium. Is this flooring certified for this, and this? That's stuff that we need experts to be able to answer. So that's another one of those things where you're reaching across the aisle. So we have the people who are administrating the question and answer, but they're working with the professionals to make sure that they're providing an accurate answer to that question that the customer is asking. And then we take that information and we put it into the knowledge base that I mentioned. So then that answer is available to customer care. And then we take all of that information that's in that knowledge base and expose it to our training team. So it's just kind of linking all of that different feedback that you're getting from our customer and making sure that you're making it available to the appropriate teams.
On the technology side, have you guys considered using generative AI to help kind of solve that problem? Maybe you don't want to give too much away, but I'm curious because it sounds like the complex issues or complex questions like that could be kind of helpful with large data sets.
Yeah, for sure. We definitely have our toes in the water and we're looking at a lot of different options. We are using, primarily it's interesting with AI, generative AI and ML, everything seems to be kind of used simultaneously, but there are some opportunities there. We're trying not to put it directly in front of the customer. We want to put this stuff in front of associates, make sure that those questions are answered accurately before we go and make it something that's customer facing. So you're definitely correct. We can look through a lot of information that we have and spot kind of what we're using a lot for is customer sentiment and just kind of see what are they saying? What are they thinking? That's a great way to kind of go about it. And that's where we are with our maturity. I think that we'll get much more advanced to where we're using it to maybe answer customer questions, but just kind of thinking about that aspect that I mentioned earlier, where our product needs to be installed and it needs to be installed correctly. That's something that we just want to be really careful about. There's some things that are very subjective that could ultimately lead to a bad experience and a claim or something being installed incorrectly. And we just want to be really careful and conscious of what's been put out there. And like I mentioned, we want to make sure we have a professional associate who understands the content there between what's being generated and what's being presented to the customer.
Makes a lot of sense. You also mentioned tiles and flooring, obviously being some of the key elements that you guys sell. Have you guys explored AR, VR, and how that could maybe help in the buying journey for the customers?
Absolutely. So we have a visualizer on our website, which allows a customer to either select a picture that looks like their room, but then they can also add their room scene or take a picture of their room and add it into the visualizer, and it has all of our product in it. So it helps them understand. I mean, that's the biggest challenge. I'll take another step back. Even when a customer walks into our store, it's 80,000 square feet of flooring. The thing that happens a lot of the time is that they walk in and they're overwhelmed. It's like, where do I start? And that's why we have our design centers. And so that helps that customer answer that question of where do I start and not be overwhelmed. Go in there, look at the vignettes, talk to a designer, let them help you understand what you're looking for, what your style is. The visualizer and the AR side of it, that's what we're trying to answer virtually. So allow that customer to kind of come in and see what our product would look like in their space. So that's an aspect of it with the visualizer where I want to make sure that we are looking to that future customer. And as that technology progresses, make sure that we're staying on top of that. Where I'm going with that, there's going to be something, you see what's happening now with some of the things where you can scan a room and you get measurements. Those are the things that we want to make sure that we're adding those type of benefits and those type of tools for our customer to, again, help them visualize what our product's going to look like in their space.
Cool. I love it. I love tactical application of technology. I think you guys are looking at it the right way in the form of start with the business objective, start with the problem or the challenge or the opportunity, and then kind of layer in the technology.
Well, and it's a crawl, walk, run type approach. So for instance, if we're looking at that technological kind of solution with the visualizer, the first thing that we need to focus on is the visuals and the pictures. So think about UGC. What is a better way to help a customer not feel overwhelmed than show them what project that another customer put into their home? And so kind of looking at that and then also highlighting the fact that we have free design services in our store and using the images, the project that a designer executed. So again, helping the customer there. So that's the crawl step, or maybe that's the walk step, but the run step is that app where you can scan a room and you see it instantly, what the product's going to look like in there. So you have to make sure that you're following all of those steps. Make sure that you're addressing the need up front, but also you're keeping that eye in the future to make sure that you're addressing that tomorrow's customer's need.
Love it. And as we look to wrap up, Jeff, any kind of parting words of wisdom? Obviously, you've had a very successful career climbing the ranks. Any kind of parting words of wisdom for anyone listening that may want to kind of emulate your career journey?
It's interesting. I wouldn't necessarily say it's something that you want to emulate. I've found my love and my passion in retail and digital and just around the customer. And so I joke sometimes, it's like, this is my lane. Where we're really fortunate is that our lane is getting wider. We continue to have to evolve and make sure that we're looking at those customer experiences and different channels and make sure that we're marrying those. So with that, I mean, the thing that I always make sure that we got to keep an eye on is making sure that you're continuing to evolve as that experience of the expectation of the customer is evolving. Customers who purchase across multiple channels are definitely more valuable. We know this. So what are you doing to make sure that you're recognizing where a customer is doing their discovery and where they're kind of heading down that path and ultimately to the purchase? It's not in the same location anymore. In a lot of cases, it's not in an area where you control it. So it's very, very important for you to kind of look at what are those trends? How's today's customer shopping? How's tomorrow's customer going to shop? And, just recognizing that there's definitely a huge value there. You have to include social, like I mentioned, with product discovery. How are customers finding products today versus how they were yesterday? Think about TikTok and trends. And when I look at our industry, I align it a lot with fashion. And you think about the fashion trends that you see that are coming on TikTok and Instagram. And if somebody's looking for inspiration to redo a kitchen or a bathroom, they're going to find it on social. So keep an eye on that and looking at things like virtual try-ons and the virtual vignettes that we have. I guess really where I'm going with that is just follow those customer trends and look at how they're shopping and how they are interacting with digital and make sure that you can ultimately take that experience and then you bring it back to the brand. And then the last thing I would say is that personalization. Everybody talks about it today, and you have to use that product data. And it goes beyond kind of that one-on-one information that you know about the one customer. You got to look at that behavior and how can you personalize an experience based on that customer's behavior. And I think that that's hugely important to just make sure that you're very, very focused on that hyper-personalization. That's the trend that customers are expecting. They shop cross channels and they expect a personalized experience when they do interact with you. So make sure that you're staying on top of those trends, watching how customers interact, and make sure you're addressing what those expectations are going to be today as well as in the future. The other part I would say is be humble. Don't get cocky. I mean, it's like one of those things where when I started, we had 30 some odd stores. The one line I just never want to hear people say is like, well, that's how we've always done it. So that's how we're going to continue to do it. I'm so proud of what my team's accomplished, but we also have to keep an eye on what that future is and just never get too cocky. Stay humble. It's hugely important to the success and moving yourself forward.
I love it. I'm fully aligned on that. Jeff, obviously we've appreciated our partnership so far. So thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're a very, very busy guy. So excited to see this one posted. Thanks again.
All right. Very good. Thank you.
The e-commerce toolbox Expert Perspectives is brought to you by Noivo. To find out more about Noivo and how we can help you debug your e-commerce site and rocket your revenue, visit www.noivo.com. That's noibu.com. And then make sure to search for the e-commerce toolbox Expert Perspectives on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found, and click subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Noivo, thanks for listening.